Hey, this is Chris Franco, and you are listening to Compound Money Quietly, the CMQ Investing Podcast. This episode began exploring this idea that the investors who consistently outperform the market decade after decade do so because they think differently. And Charlie Munger is the best example of this, and his approach to thinking was something that he outlined in detail beginning in 1994 to a class at the USC School of Business. And much of what he discussed has become the basis to conversations and content you'll find now about mental models. But rather than just relay what Charlie has already said, I've put this conversation in context of Berkshire Hathaway. So whether you already know what a mental model is or you've never heard of it, you'll gain a deeper understanding of this approach, not just why you should use it, but how Charlie Munger used it, and how by using it and by practicing it throughout his entire life, it allowed him to bring Berkshire Hathaway a competitive advantage, and one that allowed them to confidently make two of the biggest bets in investing history, and that was Coca-Cola and Apple. You'll learn all about this, and I think when you're done, you'll have more motivation than ever to revisit Charlie's initial speech to that class at USC, and then begin applying and practicing the multidisciplinary approach to thinking and using it to gain an advantage in your own life. There's a lot to cover. Let's get to it. The inspiration for this episode actually is not from a Charlie Munger quote. It's from Howard Marks, who is the founder of Oaktree Capital and the author of an excellent book titled The Most Important Thing. Marks says, quote, "Remember, your goal in investing isn't to earn average returns. You want to do better than average. Thus, your thinking has to be better than that of others, more powerful, and at a higher level. Since other investors may be smart, well-informed, and highly computerized, you must find an edge they don't have. You must think of something they haven't thought of, see things they miss, or bring insight they don't possess." The multidisciplinary approach to thinking has allowed Charlie Munger to get the advantage that Marx describes in his quote. But it didn't start with his involvement in Berkshire Hathaway. It started when he was in law school, when he first adopted the multidisciplinary approach. So I think that's a great place for us to begin. So Charlie is in law school, he's listening to a lecture, and a professor says something along the lines of, when two things are tangled together, it's perfectly feasible to think about one thing but not another. He said he knew that sentence was, quote, perfectly ridiculous, and it pushed me further into my natural drift, which was into learning all the big ideas and all the big disciplines so I wouldn't be a perfect damn fool who was trying to think about one aspect of something that couldn't be removed from the totality of the situation in a constructive fashion. One of the subjects that Charlie began learning first was psychology. And I'm paraphrasing here from memory, but he discovered that just by getting the 2 or 3 biggest textbooks in psychology and rifling through them and picking up the big ideas, that he began to see a pattern that most experts in psychology missed. And that's that in some cases you'll find 2, 3, or even 4 forces acting all in the same direction. And Charlie gave this a name. He called it a Lollapalooza effect. And that's going to become very important later, so just remember that term, Lollapalooza effect. Charlie used this approach to thinking throughout his entire adult life, and it's what gave him a unique perspective. And his unique way of looking at things made him the perfect partner for Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger joined Berkshire Hathaway in the late 1960s, and it was in 1972 with the purchase of See's Candy where we really begin to see the impact of Charlie's involvement. Simply put, Charlie Munger changed Warren Buffett's views on investing. In the 2014 Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder letter, Warren Buffett said the following: "From my perspective, Charlie's most important architectural feat was the design of today's Berkshire. The blueprint he gave me was simple. Forget what you know about buying fair businesses at wonderful prices. Instead, buy wonderful businesses at fair prices." Up to that point, Warren Buffett had used something called the cigar butt approach to investing, and it was very successful for him, but up to a certain point. Now Berkshire Hathaway had a larger capital base, and in order to move the needle, they would need to make bigger moves, and the cigar butt approach just didn't scale. The See's Candy deal was a big success, and Berkshire enjoyed continued success throughout the 1970s. But in 1984, in the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder letter, Warren Buffett says that, quote, "Our historical 22% rate, meaning the rate of growth, is just that, history. To earn even 15% over the next decade, we would need profits aggregating about $3.9 billion. Accomplishing this will require a few big ideas. Small ones just won't do. Charlie Munger, my partner in general management, and I do not have any such ideas at present, but our experience has been that they pop up occasionally. In 1987, the stock market crashed, and so did the price of Coca-Cola shares. In 1988 and in 1989, Buffett and Munger bought roughly $1 billion worth of Coca-Cola shares, the equivalent of 6.2% of the company. The purchase also made it the single largest position in Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio at the time. Now, by 1991, the Coke investment was a huge success. Buffett described it like this in the 1991 Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder letter, quote, "When we loaded up on Coke 3 years ago, Berkshire's net worth was $3.4 billion. Now our Coke stock alone is worth more than that." So what caused this to happen? Why did they do this deal? Well, in 1993, we start to see a clue, and this emerged in my research process. And I say 1993, I mean from the 1993 letter to shareholders. Buffett wrote this, quote, "Charlie and I decided long ago that in an investment lifetime, it's just too hard to make hundreds of smart decisions. That judgment became ever more compelling as Berkshire's capital mushroomed and the universe of investments that could significantly affect our results shrank dramatically. Therefore, we adopted a strategy that required our being smart, and not too smart at that, only a very few times. Indeed, we'll now settle for one good idea a year. Charlie says it's my turn." Now, I'm not suggesting that alone, that last sentence, means that Coca-Cola was all Charlie's idea, but you'll see once we dive deeper into the multidisciplinary approach and the impact that it's had on Berkshire Hathaway, I think there's a very compelling case to be made that sort of a move would not have happened without Charlie. They had scaled to a certain point, and they would need a different approach if they were going to move the needle again. Now, in the 1970s, it was the Charlie Munger approach that saved the day, and I believe in the 1980s, specifically in this Coca-Cola deal, it was the Charlie Munger approach, and more specifically, the Charlie Munger thinking system that saved the day. Now, the very next year, in 1994, at the age of 70, Charlie gave a lecture to a class at the USC School of Business. The lecture was titled Investment Expertise as a Subdivision of Elementary Worldly Wisdom. And this is the same lecture we referenced at the beginning of the episode. Let me read you part of it. What is elementary worldly wisdom? Well, the first rule is you can't really know anything if you just remember isolated facts and just try to bang them back. If the facts don't hang together on a lattice work of theory, you don't have them in usable form. You've got to have models in your head, and you've got to array your experience, both vicarious and direct, on this lattice work of models. You may have noticed students who just try to remember and pound back what is remembered. Well, they fail in school and fail in life. You've got to hang experience on a lattice work of models in your head. What are the models? Well, the first rule is that you've got to have multiple models, because if you have just one or two that you're using, the nature of human psychology is such that you will torture reality so that it fits your models, or at least you will think that it does. You become the equivalent of a chiropractor, who, of course, is the great boob in medicine. It is like the old saying, to the man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And of course, that is the way the chiropractor goes about practicing medicine. But that is a disastrous way to think and operate in the world. So you've got to have multiple models. And the models have to come from multiple disciplines, because all the wisdom is not to be found in one little academic department. That is why poetry professors, by and large, are so unwise in a worldly sense. So you've got to have multiple models across an array of disciplines. And this is where we can add something completely unique to the conversation. In 1988, 1989, the Coca-Cola deal happened. By the early 90s, it was undisputed that this was an enormous success. And in 1994, Charlie was 70 years old, on a college campus, and doing what he believes is most important, which is sharing knowledge. And Charlie was 70, and I don't necessarily think he thought he would live to be 97. And when I look back at this speech, which we'll post on our CMQ Investing Substack, it's cmqinvesting.substack.com, what you'll see is that Charlie's just giving away the blueprint. And it's not because anyone can just take it and be Berkshire Hathaway. And they also aren't going to be able to catch up with Charlie until they have a lifetime of practice in it. But he's giving everyone the formula, or the system rather, that he used that has made his life, his 70 years, such a huge success in so many different areas. At this point, it's like the system that he's adopted and used since he was a young man in law school, he's now proven it on an incredibly high playing field. He's proved it with one of the biggest investments of all time. And it's been a huge success. And in his lecture, a big part of it, he talks about mental models from all sorts of different subjects. But I'd say psychology is probably the most important area that he focuses on. And you can be the judge of that. But he also uses Coca-Cola as an example where you see Lollapalooza effects. And those Lollapalooza effects are the basis, I believe, beyond anything with the numbers, of why Berkshire was so confident putting up such enormous amounts of capital to buy those shares of Coca-Cola. My big thought here is, just like the See's Candy deal would not have happened without Charlie Munger back in 1972, the Coca-Cola deal would not have happened in the late 80s had it not been for Charlie Munger and this unique approach to thinking that he advises everyone of all ages learn, apply, and use to make their life work better. Now, in a different lecture in 1996, Charlie said, quote, "There is a truly horrible lack of synthesis, blending psychology and other academic disciplines, but only an interdisciplinary approach will correctly deal with reality in academia, as with the Coca-Cola Company." And finally, in 1997, at the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting, Charlie and Warren discussed the state of the investing world and how, as it changed, they needed a new way of seeing things. Charlie said, quote, "As the world has wised up and as stocks have behaved so well for people, good stocks generally have gone to higher and higher prices. That game gets much harder. Now, to find something at discount from intrinsic value, those simple systems ordinarily don't work. I think you can predict the future in a few places best if you understand a few basic ideas that come from a good general education. And that's what I was talking about in that talk I gave at the USC Business School. In other words, Coca-Cola is a simple company if it's stripped down and analyzed in terms of some elemental forces. Now that's exactly what he did and what Berkshire was able to do to give them the confidence to load up and buy all those shares, to make their biggest purchase ever, to buy $1 billion worth of Coca-Cola in the late 1980s. This comes from my notes as I was doing the research for this podcast. I wrote, "The multidisciplinary approach that Charlie describes as being part of his routine thinking, he says he started doing it in law school. The insights that led Berkshire to buying $1 billion worth of Coca-Cola shares in 1988 came from a multidisciplinary approach. It's obvious. And when Coca-Cola was a huge home run, and likely an example where Munger was able to test his system's value in the stock market with an unprecedentedly large bet, he became more public by spreading the value of it on university campuses. It reminds me of an inventor who's spreading the gospel of their life's work to future generations and hope that they'll take the baton and run with it. The multidisciplinary approach helped Charlie see something that others who were looking at the same thing missed. And this was in 1988. Berkshire was restrained by their size. They had to look at companies where other smart people who were increasingly computerized were also looking, which makes me think back to that Howard Marks quote. How others may be smart, well-informed, and highly computerized, and how you have to find an edge they don't have, how you have to think of something they haven't thought of, how you have to see things that they miss or bring an insight that they don't possess. And that's what this multidisciplinary approach does. Now let's fast forward. It's 2016. It's almost been 30 years since the $1 billion bet on Coca-Cola. They're looking for a great business. This is hard. It's even harder when you're limited to a small pool of opportunities and only able to make a move when you can confidently bet billions of dollars at a time. It's harder than it was in 1988, and it was hard then. Bring in the Munger system. Berkshire buys its first 10 million shares of Apple in May 2016. Apple was not a hidden gem. It was Apple. But Buffett, Munger, and the Berkshire lieutenants saw something. All total, Berkshire took a $60 billion position in Apple. They now own the same percentage of Apple as they did of Coke back when they bought Coke in 1988. And just like Coke back in the 80s, Apple now was the biggest position in Berkshire's portfolio. It actually represented more than 40% of all the stocks in their portfolio. Now in 2018, when Charlie was asked about Apple, he said, quote, "I think we've been a little too restrained. I wish we owned more of it." He knows his system. He knows the power of Lollapalooza effects. He knows a sure thing when he sees one, even if everyone else looking at it doesn't see the same thing. This is the Munger. It gives me chills. It gives me goosebumps. It's like this is, when he said, and I'm going to repeat this quote, he said the multidisciplinary approach and practicing the multidisciplinary approach throughout his life, he said, quote, "I can't tell you what that's done for me. It's made life more fun. It's made me more constructive. It's made me more helpful to others. It's made me enormously rich." Why else would he say that? Why else would he say that this is the thing? And if you want to see it in action, look at the Coca-Cola deal, look at the Apple deal. Both companies, while different, have enormous psychological forces at play. And who else would see that other than someone who thought something that a professor said in law school didn't make sense about how you could isolate something and understand it by itself? Someone who taught themselves psychology, someone who integrated the big ideas from psychology into all areas of their life. That's what being multidisciplinary is all about. Who else would have had the skill set to see Coca-Cola and Apple in this kind of way, to see it in a way that no one else did? And then, as he said, confidently predict the future and put billions of dollars against your prediction and be right. Now, remember that Howard Marks quote, that your thinking has to be better than that of others, both more powerful and at a higher level. Remember, he said that other investors may be smart, well-informed, and highly computerized. You must find an edge they don't have. You must think of something they haven't thought of, see things they miss, or bring insight they don't possess. You have to react differently and behave differently. The Charlie Munger system, the multiple mental models approach, the multidisciplinary approach, that's been able to provide Berkshire Hathaway with its edge in multiple decades. And don't forget that every decade since the Coke deal, it's only gotten harder. Berkshire Hathaway has only gotten larger. Their pool of investment opportunities has gotten smaller. The competition has gotten better. And frankly, the scrutiny has become even more intense. I mean, Warren Buffett can't wake up in the morning without someone who's my age criticizing him for not buying Bitcoin. And this is someone who's compounded money at 20% for 55 plus years. But again, the Munger system, it's the X factor. It's not easy to do, but it's simple to understand. And this will be the first of many, I believe, many podcast episodes where we unravel this idea and make it more usable. Charlie Munger says that the best thing a human being can do is help another human being know more. If you enjoyed this podcast and if you learned something and you think that someone else who you know could benefit from learning something from this episode, please share it with them. That goes a long way. Please subscribe, leave a review. Again, this is your podcast. I really appreciate all the feedback. You can send your opinions and your thoughts to compoundmoneyquietly@gmail.com. My name is Chris Franco. This is Compound Money Quietly. We'll talk to you soon.